Hello and welcome to the Tough Girl podcast, which is all about motivating and inspiring you. I'm your host, Sarah Williams. The Tough Girl podcast is sponsorship and ad-free thanks to the monthly financial support of patrons. To help me increase the amount of female role models in the media, please do go and visit Patreon, patreon.com/Tough Girl podcast and sign up from $2 a month to $25 a month. All patrons will get their name on a dedicated patrons page on the Tough Girl website. All female patrons $5 and above are invited to join the closed Facebook group, the Tough Girl Tribe. Today, I'm delighted we're going to be speaking with Rosie Watson, who is running from the UK to Mongolia. She's finding stories of better ways of living in the climate crisis.
I'm 25 years old and I'm from the Lake District in England. And I've lived there since I was born. And I come from a really outdoorsy background, I guess. I grew up in the bottom of one of the most remote valleys and kind of ran around outside the whole of my childhood. And my parents used to both be outward bound instructors. So I guess that's what got me into the outdoor vibe. And although when I was a teenager, I had a few years where I kind of rejected all of that and wanted to be a fashion designer, but then I came back to it. Yeah, I've always loved running as well. So that's, I guess, how I ended up doing this big running challenge. I started off with orienteering, which helped my confidence with navigation, I guess, to do solo adventures, and then got more into fell running, which is a really great scene in the Lake District. Yeah, and I also studied environment and business at University of Leeds, and then did lots of work experience in different companies and charities and organizations, always based around tackling the climate crisis. So that's the two key things I think that led to doing this kind of thing that I'm doing now.
Yeah, tell everybody what it is that you are doing at the moment.
Yeah, so I'm running from the Lake District where I'm from to Mongolia, and I set off on the 17th of August. And yeah, at the moment I'm in Kosovo. I've got stuck here because of coronavirus, but the purpose of the adventure, it's called the New Story Run, and it's about meeting people along the way who are trying to create a new story or way of doing some things or way of living or way of working or building or anything that's more healthy for the planet and for humans and other species, and creating this new way of living which could be more positive and tackles the climate crisis.
Rosie, where did this idea come from?
I always wanted to do some kind of really long adventure, I think inspired by people who'd cycled around the world, for example, Alistair Humphreys and other types of adventurers like that. And I knew I would probably want to do a running one because that's what I love doing. And then I knew I also wanted to put this climate crisis purpose into it somehow. So I had all of these ideas just going around my head for a while. And then I finished university and had 1 year where I worked a bit, but I always thought, right, I'll do this 1 year and then I'll go the next year. And so even before I had the proper idea of the New Story Run formed, I was like, right, this is the year that whatever I'm going to do, I'm going to set off. And I kind of committed to doing that before I knew what it would actually be. And I started training for it as well. And then maybe a few months before I actually set off, I was like, right, what is this going to be? Where am I going to go? So it was an interesting process of how it began.
Who did you tell first? Did you tell anybody about this dream?
I think my parents knew I wanted to do something like this, but it was all very vague, even for myself. And when I was looking for a job for after university, I was looking for temporary jobs which wouldn't be like a commitment to, for example, wouldn't be something like a grad scheme where you have to do 2 years or something like that. And I was kind of saying to potential employers that I wouldn't stay longer than a year because I had this adventure plan. And I also had a running coach, and I'd said I had a vague adventure plan where I'd have to run every day carrying rucksack. But yeah, it was all very vague and loose. And it wasn't a kind of, I didn't kind of sit down and be like, this is what I'm going to do. It was just, I guess I vaguely talked about it to lots of people.
When did you commit? When was it sort of like the start date was put in the diary? When was it like, oh, like the reality of like, oh my God, I'm actually doing this in X amount of time? When did that happen for you?
I think, let me just work this out. I think it was something like in May. So the May before I left. So it wasn't that soon before I left because I'd finished the job I had in Edinburgh and I just came home to live with my parents to save money for this adventure. And originally I thought I'll save up some money and I'll go in October, which just because of then I'd be able to save some more money, but I'd still go that year because I didn't want to delay for another year. But then when I was working in an outdoor shop near where I live in the Lake District, and I was kind of thinking about it and talking to my colleagues, and they were like, why are you going in October, like the wettest, coldest, most miserable month of the entire year? And then I had this realization that it would be a much better idea to go in a month like August. And so I suddenly moved it 2 months closer, which felt really like I was suddenly like, oh my God, that's really soon. I need to plan. And then from then on, all my time was either training or planning. And then I think I just kind of plucked a date out of the air because my boss needed to know exactly when I would leave. So I think it was something like May or the beginning of June that I realized that I did actually have a date to leave by then.
So let's go back to that time. So end of May, beginning of June, you've committed, you've told your boss the date you're leaving, you're suddenly going on this adventure. Talk us through that time period, because what did you need to get done in that time period? And how did you organize? How did you plan? Were you trying to plan the whole trip? Was it just the first couple of weeks? How were you doing it? What were the steps that you were taking?
I think it was actually the hardest time. It was so much stuff to do, which is, I don't understand how there was so much stuff to do because I wasn't trying to plan the whole trip. Like you said, I was only trying to plan very roughly a vague idea of the route, but I knew that I wanted it to be open to different projects and people I could visit. A key part of the whole thing is to make sure it's not too planned out, because I also didn't want to have a schedule or a commitment to the number of kilometers to do, because I knew that the most important thing for such a long trip is being able to have lots of flexibility so you don't get injured, especially with running, because running can a really big impact. There was lots of things to do with sorting out my kit, and that's something which can take endless amounts of time because it's so easy to go over and over and over the kit when actually it's probably not as important as the amount of time you end up spending on it. And I created my website. That was quite a lot of work. And it was trying to get that done and contacting a few different brands to see if they would help sponsor me with the more expensive bits of kit that I needed. And it was one of those things where there's always bits that have to go in order. So, for example, once I had the website, then I could start telling people about it and trying to get some local media interested. And it was also easier with contacting brands because it looked a bit more like I was actually going to do it, as opposed to someone saying, oh, I'm just going to run to Mongolia, which a lot of people didn't really believe me. They were just like, oh, right, yeah, sure you are. I'm trying to think. So, yeah, there's lots of website stuff. And yeah, the first couple of weeks of the route, I really tried to nail down and also figure out who I could stay with along the way. If there was places, I wild camp a lot and that's fine, but it's always good to link into people you know. A lot of it was emailing as many contacts as possible who knew people in different countries and also knew people who worked in different organizations to do with what I was interested in. And emailing takes a surprising amount of time. So that was really one of those ongoing things that just gobbled up time. And of course, there was the training, because the best training to do in that situation is doing really long, slow days with a rucksack and doing maybe back-to-back days, like a weekend, doing a long, slow run on a Saturday and a Sunday. And then because you'll be really tired, you've kind of used up 2 full days without doing anything else apart from running, which is blissful. But if you've got lots of other stuff to do, it's also challenging.
Could you share more about how you are paying for this?
At the beginning, I thought I would just use my own savings, and I didn't really think about getting any other kind of financial support or anything like that. So I had a really small budget, and I based it on £50 a week. So that's basically not paying for any accommodation. So that's why I was relying on contacts and finding hosts every so often so I could wash kit and actually be in a house for a while. So I based my savings on using that budget. I knew that I had more than a year's worth of money to go on if that budget worked out. And even though I didn't have enough to do a 2-year trip, which I thought it could be if I made it the whole way, I thought it's better to just go with that amount of money. And if I managed to do the first year really, really well, then it's probably more likely I'd be able to find some financial sponsorship after that. If I was already like, I've come this far, and to get to Mongolia, I need some more support. So I didn't have enough money to do the whole trip, and I kind of went on that being fine. Anyway, after a couple of weeks, I think it was a week after I set off, so many people had said to me, "Oh, how can we support you? Like, how can we give you some money to help with your trip?" And I was like, "Oh, I hadn't even thought of that." And I met, as one of the stories that I talked about on my website, I met Jamie Driscoll, who is a mayor in Newcastle. And he was like, "You need to set up a crowdfunder. Like, this is something that people will support. They really want to be involved. It helps people feel like they're more invested in some way on like a individual level. People who can't help on the route or don't live anywhere near you, but they want to be involved. They could just give a little bit of money and it could help you in funding the adventure." And so after so many people asked me about this, I decided to set up a GoFundMe account and explain what I was doing and the purpose behind it, and that I had this budget of £50 a week, and if anyone wanted to support, they could. And I didn't really promote it on social media apart from one tweet, and posted it on my Facebook page and something. And people have been so generous that at the moment that's what I'm using to fund the whole thing. I think I haven't had to use any of my own savings yet. So I think based on the £50 a week budget, I've got enough through that for the first year so far, I think.
And how are you finding the £50 budget? Like, is that easy to stick to? I was thinking of food, like, because I mean, I remember you just on the Appalachian Trail, like I was spending like over $1,000 a month, and it was all just food, like pretty much. It was crazy what I was eating.
I'll be honest, the first, it hasn't worked out at all with that budget. But now that I'm in Eastern Europe, it's really easy to stay under the budget. When I was in Western Europe, it was just like it felt impossible. I spent over that quite significantly because obviously I'm running through winter and everything as well. And if you're running in winter and you're freezing cold and you need to stop to have a snack or something, you basically can stop for like a minute before you're too cold and you have to just keep going again. So I just had way more coffee breaks and hot chocolate breaks than I had planned to in Western Europe. And that was like so many expensive places because I was quite often in rural locations. So there may be like, there's extra cost of getting to these like lodge type restaurants and cafes and stuff. And there'd be like coffees for $3.90 or something, which just isn't part of a low budget scenario. So it definitely hasn't worked out for the first 6 months, but I think from now on it'll be consistently under that amount, and I think it'll be easier to balance it out over the whole thing as working out roughly like that.
Tell everybody a little bit more about the routes. So you're starting from your home, absolutely brilliant, in the Lake District. So I just want to know why Mongolia and what's the route that you're heading on?
Yeah, the why Mongolia thing is a bit of a strange one. So it kind of relates to what I was talking about, saying I didn't know exactly if I'd have enough money for much more than a year, because I also didn't really know exactly where I wanted it to end. I quite wanted it to be really open. I kind of set off with the idea of I'll go for a year and see how I enjoy it or where I end up. And then I'll probably carry on a bit if it's going really well, which so far it is, touch wood. I was aiming for somewhere in Asia, but I was like, oh, maybe I'll stop in Kazakhstan or Kyrgyzstan or something like that. And I also had Mongolia as this idea because I've always wanted to go there, and it's also really impacted by the climate crisis, so it would have been an interesting endpoint in that respect. But I didn't commit to it being Mongolia at the beginning because it was really far away. And then I spoke to a few local reporters, like they were writing little newspaper articles just in the local papers, and I think I mentioned Mongolia, and then suddenly there was all these articles which were like, Rosie is running to Mongolia. And I was like, oh, well, I guess people like to have an endpoint, so I'll just make it Mongolia as the endpoint. That was just kind of happened on its own without me really committing to it in the initial idea. Yeah, I started in the Lake District. I ran over to Newcastle and I got the ferry to Amsterdam. And then I came through the Netherlands, down through Germany, went into Switzerland very briefly, then into Austria, then back into Germany, not the Germany, into Austria, Slovenia, Croatia, Montenegro, Albania, and then to Kosovo. And the route, like I said, it happens as I go along. So I just plan it in my rest days where the next section is going to be. And I have a vague idea of where some like long distance trails and stuff like that are, but mostly it's dependent on what projects I find and what contacts I make and all that kind of thing, which happens as I go along.
What's the distance that you've run so far?
3,600 kilometers roughly.
Absolutely incredible. That's amazing. How has your body been holding up to the challenge of running with a backpack and running day after day after day?
Pretty well. I think at the beginning I was really careful about not getting injured and making sure that I kind of didn't finish each day feeling like I was totally exhausted, because it's such a long trip that you just can't break yourself like you might a little bit in other endurance challenges. Like, it's not the same as, even if you're doing a month running trip, for example, you might be going a lot faster because by the end of the month you want to feel like you've given it everything. This is more like normal life. It has to be manageable. So yeah, I was really careful at the beginning, but it's varied depending on what kind of terrain I am on. For example, it snowed really heavily when I reached the main part of the Alps, and I ended up having to go on like main tarmac roads over the Alps because all the trails were just really, really dangerous. And carrying a rucksack on really hard roads is just so bad for your legs. So at that point, everything really hurt. That was probably the toughest part of the trip so far. But as soon as I got onto trails again, it felt amazing. I was like, wow, it feels like I've got a new pair of legs because I'm on this nice soft ground. And then I also have this running buggy, which I had in the Netherlands and the start of Germany when it was really flat and there was more tarmac. And I've got it back now because initially I thought it'd be way colder once I went off the coast into Eastern Europe, which it wasn't because they've had really weird weather. So I thought I'd have to carry way more kit. So I got this running buggy back so I'd be able to keep going at a faster pace. And that's meant there's been like a change of position for my body, which has helped. It means it takes the strain off certain bits and swaps it around before. Yeah, I think that's helped keep everything working a bit.
So you mentioned about projects, like sort of meeting people from projects along the way. Could you share more about what these projects are, how you find out about them, what's maybe a couple of the favourite projects that you've discovered?
I'm trying to get as wide a variety as possible. So a few recently, just to give an example, I was meant to meet loads of people from this organisation called Women's Network in Kosovo. And it all got cancelled because of coronavirus, but we're going to have some Skype meetings, and we're going to have some discussions about how the climate crisis relates to equality, which it does really strongly. So it kind of links into everything if you start looking at how different issues interlink. There's more obvious projects like an energy project I visited in Germany, but then there's also, I visited like a protest camp in Germany as well, which is a group of activists who've been living in trees on the edge of a really ancient forest where there's been a coal mine which has destroyed 90% of the forest. And this tiny part of forest is the only part that is left. And they've been living in these trees since 2012. That was one of the most eye-opening projects, I think, that I visited. And I'm trying to think of another example. There's been so many that in Montenegro, I met a lady who works at the main nature protection organization. And it's really interesting when it's a new country, because it gives you this insight into like a completely new place that you haven't been to, and through a specific view of the benefits of the countries here in the Balkans are that there's so much untouched wilderness. It's kind of unimaginable compared to Western Europe how much space there is for other species and stuff. But they're also obviously trying to develop, and part of the reason they're so undeveloped is potentially because of the amount of wars there's been, and there's all this history wrapped up in everything, and then issues with how they develop in a way which doesn't follow the path of destroying so much space for nature like Western Europe. And in terms of how I find out about them, some of it's just research I've done beforehand or contacts people from home had. There was quite a lot of those, but further closer to home. And now it's more based on people I meet know of people in the next country, or the neighbouring countries or other places in their country, and they usually put me in touch. So it kind of happens as a rolling thing.
How have you found the wild camping while you've been en route? Are you managing to do that as much as you thought you would? Is it easy to find places to camp?
I haven't wild camped as much as I thought I would, but not because it hasn't been easy, basically just purely because so many people have invited me into their houses. So in Germany, quite a lot of people, well, firstly in Germany and the Netherlands, it's technically illegal to wild camp. So loads of people had said to me, like people I'd met in the country had said, oh, you should just ask people if you can camp in their gardens, or a farmer if you can camp in his field, which I hadn't done for a while. But then once I got into the more hilly areas, there was less obvious places to camp because there wasn't that many flat places. So I started asking people. I just knock on a door in a village and say, do you know where's okay to camp, or could I camp in this field? And from that point onwards, when I started doing that, I'd say at least 50% of the time when I asked just a random stranger, I'd often just get invited in, and they'd be like, oh, you can just stay with us because it's cold, and like we have a spare room. And so since I started doing that, it's become less camping, and I've stayed with so many generous people. Like I thought those situations would happen just based on what other travelers have told me, but I didn't think it would have been such a regular occurrence of complete strangers just within a few minutes of conversation, just inviting you in and making you dinner and giving you a bed and a shower and washing your clothes and that kind of thing. So yeah, there's been less wild camping, and recently I've actually missed the camping a bit. I've been kind of had a few days where it's like getting to the end of the day and I'm like avoiding people that I see on the street because I'm like, no one asks me where I'm going or what I'm doing because I really want to wild camp tonight.
The kindness of strangers. Have you always been like quite confident about asking random strangers like, hey, can I sleep in your garden? Or is that something that you maybe felt a little bit apprehensive or nervous about at the beginning? Or are you just like super used to it now? Does that sort of stuff faze you or not really?
I've definitely got more used to it, but yeah, it does feel really strange, and like kind of going along being like, well, which house do I knock on the door of? Like, it's always an interesting thing. And then yeah, I don't know, it's a weird feeling when you like finally decide which house you're going to knock on the door of for some reason, and then you kind of go and knock, and I always just kind of go and do it and try and not stop, because then I'm stood there like, it's too late now, I've done it, I just have to wait and see what happens. But I don't think it's like I wouldn't say I was really that nervous. It was more kind of just felt so unusual. So it was more like a bit of like an adrenaline buzz, I guess, because you have no idea what's going to happen.
How do you decide like which door you're going to knock on? Is there a method?
Yeah, I think at the beginning, I would do things like if there was a garden or like they were growing vegetables or something, or yeah, if there was toys and I could see they had kids or evidence that it wasn't just one person on their own, I think that made me more likely to knock on that door. And I think at the beginning I had like I was like, yeah, that makes total sense because like, people who do gardening are usually nice people. People who have kids are usually like nice people. But then I don't know if that's just based on lots of people I know do gardening. So maybe I think most people in general are good. So maybe it was just a way of making myself more comfortable with it or making myself feel like I had a bit more control or structure behind just knocking on random people's doors.
Yeah. What's been the biggest challenge on your run, or what have been some of the challenges that you've had to face and overcome?
I'd say the biggest challenge has been trying to get the balance right between getting enough rest and also doing all of the website and research stuff, which I hadn't really thought about before I left. I thought I'd have like one rest day a week and that would be fine. And I think if I was just doing it purely as an endurance challenge, I'd have much less rest days. But I found at the beginning that I'd be trying to cram all of this research and writing and website stuff, which I do everything on my phone, so it's quite difficult to do all that on my phone. I'd end up not resting at all on rest days. I'd like wake up and then I'd be on my phone for like 12 hours with no break, and then I'd be like, right, I have to go to sleep now. I'd be like tick 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 all of these jobs, and then I just wasn't getting enough rest at the beginning, and I had to accept that I have to just have way more rest days than I thought. And sometimes it's a bit like frustrating because you want to keep going, but you also have to make sure you have time when you switch off and just let yourself lounge around and sleep.
Probably, when you started, it was probably, this whole excitement and everything was new and exciting, and you're out there running every day and you're getting used to everything. And now you've been out there for such a long time, bearing in mind you started in August 2019. Has it become more mundane now? Are you still enjoying it?
I'm definitely still enjoying it overall, but yeah, it's recently in the last couple of months, I think I've realized it's really become so normal that it's kind of strange. And the last month, like I said, I have this running buggy, which meant that I've been mostly stuck on small roads, which I've never liked road running that much anyway. And I much prefer being on small mountain trails, but it just made sense for the route and what projects I was visiting. And that I found really weird because I kind of was like, had this frustration of feeling like there wasn't enough adventure in it anymore because I was just running along roads and yeah, everything felt, at one point I was thinking everything felt a bit too easy, which is really bizarre when it's actually quite hard. But I think it depends where I am. Obviously there are more mundane bits because when you're running every step, you can't just skip between the nice mountain spots. You have to do everything. You have to go through the boring bits of countries and the good bits of country. So, but overall, yeah, I'm still enjoying all of it.
How do you deal with the bad days or the low days or the low moments, or when it's been raining constantly, or just the when things just haven't gone to plan? How do you cope with those days where maybe your mind or your heart isn't quite in it?
Music always helps a bit. The hardest days I have are usually when I'm on a route where I'm by a road and there's lots of traffic noise. So music is always a really good thing because it blocked it out and you can listen to some uplifting songs. And if you get in a certain mindset, it is really good at shifting it, which it's difficult to do otherwise. And then one thing I try and do, but it's more difficult when it's colder because you can't really hang around, is just like kind of let the grump happen. So like if you get in a bad mindset, just kind of let it do its thing for a while, as opposed to try and battle it and just accept that you're not going to feel amazing all the time. So when it's warm and sunny, it's easy to do that. You can kind of just sit down, have a little rant in your head about something, have a snack, and then it doesn't take long before that's boring because like you can't just sit there in a grump all day because it's actually quite a boring thing. And usually that just snaps me out of it. I'm like, right, I may as well get on with it now. But when it's winter, it's harder. So like music, and I think often you just need a bit of food. Like when you get in a bit of a bad mindset, you usually just need a snack, is what I found. And then if that doesn't work, I guess I've got lots of friends and family and just supporters who found the trip, and I can always message people and have a chat and stuff like that.
Could you talk us through like your daily routine in a little bit of detail? So what time are you waking up? Are you setting an alarm? What are you eating for breakfast? What's packing up your tent like? What's lunch? What is it like for you out there every day?
On a day when I'm running, I usually set my alarm for 7 or 7:30, and then I usually have some kind of oat breakfast. So if it's not too cold, then I'll usually just soak the oats with some like nuts and raisiny kind of thing, or I'll make it into porridge. That's breakfast every day. Sometimes I'll have a bit of chocolate as well. Yeah, and then I try and get everything packed up and try and set off within an hour or two. Like I'm not very good at getting going early. I always have really good intentions and it never really works. And then once I've set off, I always kind of look at the clock and I go for 2 hours, and then I'll stop and have a break and have a snack. Then I'll go for another 2 hours and stop and have a break and have a snack. So I always try and time it in these 2 hour blocks. And I basically do that until I've either reached where I plan to go or it gets time to set up the tent again. So I kind of just have snacks as opposed to a main lunch. Things like nuts and tortilla wraps and cheese and chocolate. And then dinner, I always have spaghetti and red lentils and soup sachets, which is slowly getting more sick of that as we go along. But at the moment, I've had that basically every running day for a really long time.
How do you spice things up? What's like a little treat that you would give yourself when you think, oh, tonight I'm going to eat X and it's going to be?
I'd say if I'm having a treat, I'll have it in the day. So if I'm going past a town or something or a cafe, then I might stop and have like a nice coffee. And then now it's a shame the cafes don't really have cake anymore, which is heartbreaking. Because usually the treat would be something like having some apple strudel or something if it's been a really long day or I feel like I need a treat.
Now, and obviously when we're talking like coronavirus has hit Europe, how is it impacting on you? Where are you? What are you doing? What's happening?
I'm in Kosovo and the borders are all closed, so I'm stuck here. I should mention, so a couple of months after I left, my partner Mike decided to start a parallel adventure called the New Story Ride. So he's doing like a backpacking trip on a different route, but we meet up at different points, maybe every few weeks. And we're basically doing the same thing in terms of the projects, but through different routes. And we managed to make sure we didn't get stuck in different countries, which is good. So once we realized all the borders were closed, we kind of made our way to the same point in Kosovo at Prizren, and we're hanging out in this hostel, which the guys who running it was empty anyway, obviously, because no one's going to hostels with the coronavirus. And they're just letting us stay here for the foreseeable future, which we have no idea how long it's going to be. So it's definitely very uncertain at the moment. And at the moment, I feel fine with it because I had a few really long days. The longest day I've done in my trip so far, I did 43 kilometers the day before I stopped because of the coronavirus. So at the moment, I'm like, oh, yeah, it's like an extended break. This is just nice for my legs and I can catch up with my admin. But I don't know, give it a week. I think I might be going a bit crazy because I haven't stayed in one place for longer than 4 or 5 nights since August. So that will be interesting.
Do you know, I'm so pleased that you're not alone and that you've got, like a loved one there with you. That's, yeah.
Definitely makes it easier.
And Rosie, how can people follow along with your journey, support you, keep up to date with your blogs?
My website is newstoryrun.wordpress.com. And then I'm on Facebook and Twitter and Instagram. It's probably easiest if you just search for #newstoryrun, because there's different handles for each of them, but it should always come up if you put that hashtag in and search for it.
Rosie, before we go, I'd love for you just to leave our listeners with final words of advice and wisdom about what you've learned so far on this journey that you'd like other women and girls to know.
I think basically there's obviously this idea that lots of people think you might be vulnerable, or, like it's dangerous to go places as a woman or a girl. And I think you have to remember that everyone has really good intentions for that. And there will be people who are really close to you as well who might say that, or they might not consciously think that, but the things they say might suggest that. And you have to really try and make sure you listen, but also listen to yourself and try and build up a sense of trusting your own ability. I think like one of the best pieces of advice I've ever been told was trust yourself, which sounds like really simple, but if you try and remember that and try and keep pushing your comfort zone in whatever situation it might be, that's like anything, not just to do with outdoor adventures, then you can build up this sense of confidence and kind of a buffer against the things that you might hear from other people, and just have faith in your own strength and kind of not dismissive of other people's concerns, but remember that just because someone you respect or something is saying that you might be in danger, that doesn't mean it's true, because everyone has these influences which tells them that women and girls are vulnerable. And the more people who can trust their own strength, then the more we can kind of show that that's not true.
I think sometimes it can take time to learn that as a skill, because it is almost a skill to trust yourself, to believe in yourself, to know that you can do it, and to have that confidence in what you're doing.
But I think it's important to see it as a skill, or like a thing that you have to actively yourself try and keep developing. Like often we talk about confidence, for example, as something where like, oh, that person's confident, like it's something you have, and once you have it, it's like a possession, you've just got it. I think it's something you have to like keep taking care of yourself and like working to cultivate it. And it's a lot more healthy if you think of it that way.
Rosie, I think what you're doing is incredible. And I love your story. I love your journey. It is so, so inspiring. I will make sure I share all of the links to your website, to your GoFundMe. Best of luck with the rest of your journey. We will be following. We will be supporting. Thank you so much for coming on Tough Girl Podcast to share more about it.
Thank you so much for having me. Yeah, it's been great.
Hey tribe, I hope you enjoyed that episode with Rosie. What an absolute legend, running to Mongolia. Absolutely inspiring stuff. Everything that we have talked about today will be available in the show notes at toughgirlchallenges.com, so please do go check it out. Just want to give you a quick recommendation for another podcast episode that I think you'll enjoy if you're into long distance running and big challenges. Go and take a listen to another Rosie Swale Pope, who is currently running to Kathmandu in Nepal. Rosie is 73 years young. What a challenge and what an adventure. All the links can be found at toughgirlchallenges.com. There is a lot going on at the moment with regards to the coronavirus, which is impacting people all over the world. I hope that you are okay wherever you are. I do schedule podcast episodes in advance. This is the first time that I've really talked about it. I just wanted to, check in with you all and just to let you know that I'm doing well. I am at home. I'm back on the Wirral. I'm back in the United Kingdom. I'm with my parents. We are all well. I'm very fortunate that I can work from home, work from my office, aka my bed, and continue to produce the Tough Girl podcast episodes. However, my extra jobs that I do normally do have been stopped and cancelled, so I'm no longer able to work or do interviews for Camp America. I'm not down at my local coffee shop washing the dishes, and I probably won't be working at Royal Ascot this year selling silk top hats. So I do just want to say a massive thank you to all of my patrons who are able to support me during this time. It really does make a massive amount of difference knowing that I have an income coming in. If you do want to support the work that I'm doing, please do go visit Patreon, patreon.com/toughgirlpodcast. I'm not quite sure, obviously, what's going to be happening over the coming months. It's very difficult to plan. So what I'm going to do is focus on what I can control, and that's going to be the producing podcast episodes. Ideally, producing 2 per week, the Tough Girl podcast, which comes out on a Tuesday, and the Tough Girl podcast extra when we go back and speak with previous guests, and they will come out on a Thursday at 7 a.m. UK time. So make sure you subscribe so you won't miss out on any episodes. I'm also going to be catching up with editing, so I'm going to be editing the Overland track videos and getting them out on YouTube. If you haven't subscribed to the Tough Girl YouTube channel, please do go check it out. There are hundreds of videos for you to watch, from me through hiking the Appalachian Trail, from cycling from Vancouver down to Mexico, down the Pacific Coast Highway. There are vlogs on the Lycian Way. There are daily vlogs from the Camino Portuguese. So, lots of entertainment out there for you. I do just want to say again, thank you for all of your support. I'm sending you big virtual hugs wherever you are in the world. Please keep safe. Please look after your loved ones and do what you need to do to get through this. I'll be back with you next Tuesday for another awesome episode of the Tough Girl podcast. All right, take care, lots of love, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye.